You're listening to iCommunicate with your host, Mark Altman, on Full Service Radio, AM 830 WCRN. Once again, here's Mark.
Welcome back to iCommunicate, Finding Your Voice. I hope you're all having a wonderful Thursday afternoon. And if you're at work, make sure you get up, stretch, experience wellness. Don't stop listening to the show, but stay within earshot, but definitely get up and stretch. Kathy Stoker, before the break, you were mentioning perseverance and resiliency, and I want to pick up on that. And I have to tell you both, I am not a fan of big words like respect and integrity and perseverance because they're powerful words and they're meaningful words, but they're too big. And I don't think most kids connect with those words because they're too big. So I want to start out, Kathy, asking you, how do you persevere in your career? You know, what if a student came up to you and said, Ms. Stoker, you know, if you consider yourself someone that perseveres, give me some examples of how you persevered. How would you answer that? No softballs here, and I communicate finding your voice.
In the hot seat for sure.
Yep.
In the hot seat. So I've had to persevere in the teaching field in several ways. One is sometimes we as teachers can be our own worst enemy. And sometimes it can be a very isolating profession. So I have had to go out and seek my own village of fellow teachers, fellow teachers within the school and outside the school, other educators who are like-minded and who I feel comfortable being challenged by in a safe environment. And so there have been times when early on in my career, I was a huge proponent for developing emotional and social intelligence, and I was poo-pooed and said, no, we have to focus on academics and rigor. Never did I say we shouldn't focus on those topics, but that really we need to look at the whole child, the whole teenager, and what are we trying to do in education. So I've had to fight negativity in those ways, and so often for me it is talking with people who I trust and feeling validated and then being able to practice being assertive and saying, I hear what you're saying and this is what I'm saying.
So Kathy, you know, you've really got me thinking with your answer because one of the crusades that's such a focus of Mindset Go right now is getting people to recognize processes over outcomes. Mm-hmm. And we know in school that can be very tough.
Right.
So my question for you is, what I took from your story is that you had the courage and confidence. First of all, you recognized your need for the village, mm-hmm. right? And second, you had the courage and confidence to go act on that need. So was it something that you remember? Was there a milestone moment? Was it just a gradual thing? What gave you the courage and confidence to go advocate for yourself and cope that way?
I think it's when fellow teachers and educators have shared their own journeys. So I'm thinking of a particular educator. She's now retired. Her name's Johanna, and she shared her own stories of other teachers being very negative, you know, again, dismissing, being condescending to her teaching methods, and yet her showing me how she was able to overcome those by still plowing through, doing the next right thing. And so that modeling gave me the strength in the classroom to say, if Johanna can do this, I can do this. Angela Mayer, who's an educator and author, talks about creating your own dream team. And so I use a lot of mindful practice within my own teaching and increasing my own self-awareness. The poet Maya Angelou talks about before she would recite a poem, she would think of women in her life that were strong, such as her grandmother, and that would enable her to have that strength to do that. So often I do think of other people, my own mom, my junior English teacher, Mrs. Ligon, as I mentioned before, and, you know, sort of channel their positive energy and really believe in what I'm doing. And often I do cite research. I do a ton of research about education. And so when I'm in that struggle, often then I cite credible sources as to why I'm doing what I'm doing.
So Karen, you know, to build on that, Kathy's talked about modeling certain behaviors, which is so critical. But I want to ask you, the reason why I made the point before about words like integrity, respect, and perseverance is because I think as parents, we tend to talk about them, but we don't necessarily share our own experiences of either A, how we persevered or how we demonstrate integrity and respect. So what about you? When you look at your own parenting, do you feel like you're doing that enough? And do you recognize areas that you've persevered in your life?
Sure. So I would say, and maybe I'm an anomaly, but I do share a lot with my kids in terms of making sure that they understand that even though I will sometimes pretend to have all the answers, that I do struggle with things, or situations that come up, and I do use a lot of things as they probably would tell you too many learning examples. So way back when, I'm a GM at Westborough TV, and I did the training thing for a while, but I got an English degree and a secondary ed teaching certification. So I think in my heart, I never ended up teaching, but I'm a teacher at heart. And so I tend to do that to them. So there are many times where I will say, here's the situation, and here's how I handled it, to kind of model for them in real life, people they know, not oversharing, but making sure that they understand that you do struggle, and here's how you work through those things. And I think sharing some of that with them so that they understand that parents don't always have all the answers, so that as they're struggling, they don't feel like, well, it's just because I'm a kid. These are some things I often say to them, when you grow up, you're still going to have some of these same issues. They don't go away just because you're an adult.
So let's take a scenario. We're all sports fans, so let's take a scenario. Let's say we have a child who's playing basketball, and that child's team loses, and it just so happens that our child missed the winning shot, okay? So when it comes to resiliency, I think there's always a question of how do you, and not to use too strong of a word, but how do you grieve? How do you process the feelings of disappointment? So when you guys dealing with the kids and students you have at TV station, your own kids, at school, your own kids, what kind of guidelines do you give them for processing feelings? And so they can feel like they're being resilient, but at the same time, they still can process those feelings.
Well, it's really hard to do both, but that's a skill again. I think that we need to practice. So, when you just said that, I think back to my freshman year of high school, and I lost. The team lost
understood.
the game when I missed the 2 foul shots at the end. So I can draw on personal experience, and I can remember that decades later, and I'm okay for it. So I think it's encouraging them to take some time to, whether they have to cry, whether they need to, hit a pillow, hit whatever, let out that frustration, and then say, okay, it was a game. We now need to focus on the next game. And I was just talking with one of the Westborough High athletes who his team lost last night, and we had that same conversation. He said, I'm so angry. And I said, okay, then feel the anger, but you got to give yourself, a time frame here because you have another game on Friday. So what do you do? And also to look at the bigger perspective. The Celtics lose, the Patriots lose, individual players miss free throws all the time or the winning basket. So I think it's having those conversations, but being able to do it in a safe way, to validate someone's feelings, and also as an adult share, it's time to move on, but in a proactive, positive way. I hear so many people say, suck it up. And it's not to say that there aren't times in which you need to suck it up, but at the same time, I think we need to strike a balance.
Well, Karen, in Bill Belichick's famous expression, we're on to Cincinnati, has always struck me as so interesting because it's got 2 very different messages there, doesn't it? And so, on one hand, it's like, great, let's move on, let's not dwell on it, but are we actually processing what just happened, right?
Sure. Well, I think that gets a little bit into the conversation, and people talk about a lot the whole idea of letting these kids fail. And sports is just a great way for them to experience failure, whether it's as a team or on their own, and realize, that they can still be okay and come out of that. And I think that's really important. It reminded me of a story. It's not sports related, but the whole prepare your child for the path. Don't prepare the path for your child, right? So my child one day forgot her violin and went out to the bus stop and went to school. And I went out to the bus stop with my younger child later, and a parent was there, and I said, I feel so bad. She forgot her violin today. And the parent said, "Oh, I hate when you have to drive it over to school for them. It's such a pain to drive it all the way over there." And I said, "Well, I'm not going to drive the violin over." And the parent said, "You've got to be kidding me. You're such a mean mom." I said, "I think I'm being a good mom, in the sense that she's going to get to class. She's going to have to explain that she forgot it. She's going to be distressed that she has to explain that to the teacher, who probably is not going to be happy. And guess what? She's then going to go to lunch a little while later. It's going to be okay. Maybe there was a consequence, but she's going to get home that day and get up the next day and keep going." So, I mean, those are good skills for them to learn, right? That you can fail, it doesn't work out, and yet you're still okay afterwards. And it just seems to me like that's another reason that I have my kids in sports is there's a lot of failures there that you've got to learn to work through. And there's similar skills whether you're playing a sport or, you're out in life and you have failures you have to face.
Well, I think that's so insightful. I mean, I have 3 children. I know for my oldest child, I was constantly trying to protect them from failure and hurt. And now my 3rd child, I'm like, well, now I do it differently. But you've learned, you learn.
Right.
So I think that's great wisdom, Karen. And I guess I'd like to ask you both, we're talking so much today about creating a culture for kids to find their voice, to advocate for themselves, to communicate face-to-face. But I also hear a lot of kids tell me that I work with that typically the conversations they have with their parents revolve around homework and chores. So the very few times you get your kids to actually talk and have face-to-face, we're more talking about responsibilities and day-to-day stuff. So, how do you, Karen, create that culture? Because you said throughout the show you've really done a great job creating that culture in your household. How do you create that culture? Well, no, and it's evident in your personality too, that's who you are. But was it a special process you created? Was it just innate in you? How do you create that culture for your kids to feel safe and open to talk with you?
Well, I think you do that from the beginning, right? And, you said there's words like respect that kids really know what that means. But I think kind of having a situation which they know I'm the parent, and yet they know I absolutely care about them and absolutely have their best interests at heart. And so you kind of create a culture of respect, and I think by connecting with them and by being interested in them, I mean, that's a challenge for us parents too, right? That they're trying to talk to you and you're distracted by other things. So I know that that's true with me too, and my kids will call me out on that, if I have my phone or they're trying to communicate with me and I'm not totally engaged. So, being present with them. I mean, a lot of people, I saw that as a lot of New Year's resolutions this year, that people were saying they wanted to be present with their kids. But I think trying to do that and take a real interest in who they are and what they're doing, and validating their feelings about things, not brushing those off. I mean, those are all ways in which you can kind of get that positive relationship established with them.
Okay, when we come back from our final segment, we're going to talk to Kathy about can you be a parent and a friend at the same time? And so we're going to talk about that when we come back from the break. This has been iCommunicate, Finding Your Voice. Join us for our final segment.